On a hillside at the edge of the city, a wall of flame rises straight out of bare rock. No wood and no wick behind it, and a shepherd walks his flock past without breaking stride. Before sunrise, in a kitchen nearby, a small pear-shaped glass fills with dark tea over a gas ring the family keeps lit day and night. Out past the seawall, a rusted derrick stands in the Caspian, pumping the same fire the old priests once knelt to. This is Azerbaijan, on the western shore of the Caspian, a country whose name means land of fire, whose people have lived above burning ground for 4,000 years without finding it strange. Here, the same flame is worshipped, cooked over, and sold by the barrel. Why the ground burns is settled. How an ordinary life gets built on top of it is not, and neither is why. For 1 million citizens, that same fire names a 30-year loss. What follows is a portrait of life on burning ground. A wild flame on a hill, fire worshipped here long before any mosque. A tea glass kept always hot, a homeland lost for 30 years and only now half returned, and an economy built on fire. On the Absheron Peninsula, a dry tongue of land that pushes out into the Caspian east of the capital, there is a low ochre hillside where a wall of flame stands roughly 3 meters high and burns without pause. The fire emerges straight from the base of the slope, leaning always in one direction, pressed flat by the wind that crosses the peninsula without rest, and there is no fuel behind it that any eye can find. No wood, no oil drum, no burner, only rock and the flame that rises through it. The ground here is porous sandstone, and beneath it natural gas moves upward through the pores until it reaches the surface, meets the air, and ignites as it has done without interruption for a length of time no one can fully measure. The place is called Yanar Dağ, which means burning mountain, and it sits over one of the great concentrations of surface gas seeps found anywhere on Earth. The Venetian traveller Marco Polo, passing through this region in the 13th century, is said to have written of ground that burned on its own and of oil that rose to the surface untouched by any hand. 700 years later, the flame he described still stands. After dark, when the hillside empties and the wind carries the day's heat back out to sea, the flame becomes the only light on the slope, a single orange seam against a black field of rock. It holds steady through rain, and it holds through snow. By tradition, it has burned this way for 4,000 years, and no account survives of a hand that first set it alight. The fire is treated here as a property of the ground itself, older than every faith that has since gathered around it. This is the fact the whole country is built on, and it explains the name Azerbaijanis have long given their own land. Od la Yurdu, the land of fire, a description rather than a boast. To live here is to accept, early and without drama, that the earth underfoot is not inert, that it breathes something upward that will catch and hold a flame. 20-odd kilometers to the west, the peninsula that leaks fire also holds a city. From the air at dawn, Baku curves around a wide bay on the Caspian shore, its towers and low stone quarters and ring of oil country, all crowded onto the one windy shelf of a land where some 2 million people are now reckoned to live. By most counts, close to a fifth of the entire nation gathered on the gas-rich ground that feeds the burning hill. People did not settle here in spite of what lies underneath. They settled here because of it. Because the ground that burns is also the ground that gives up oil and gas without much asking, and a city that learned early how to live above such ground had reason to stay. Baku grew up directly over the fire, and it has stayed there ever since. The wind is the constant. It rarely stops on the Absheron, and Baku's name is often traced to that fact, a city of winds whose gusts keep the flame on the hill leaning sideways and hold it flat against the slope. In the villages closest to Yanadar, that wind runs through ordinary mornings without ceremony. A line of washing goes up in a yard within sight of the flame wall, the fabric snapping and pulling on the rope in the same gust that bends the fire on the slope behind it, and no one turns to look, because to the people who live beside it, the fire is not a spectacle. It is weather, it is scenery, it is simply there. Long before the towers rose, though, others did turn to look. Priests once read this flame the way later generations would read scripture, and for centuries the burning ground drew worshippers here before it ever drew anyone else. When the first call to prayer crosses Baku before sunrise, it carries from minarets that, by the long clock of this coastline, are recent work. Islam reached the Absheron in the 7th century, arriving with Arab armies and settling over the centuries into the faith of the great majority, the shape of the calendar, the sound that opens the day. Yet the reverence the call announces is not the first this ground has known. Long before Islam reached the peninsula, priests tended flames that rose, untouched by wick or fuel, from the same porous rock that burns on the hill, and pilgrims knelt to fire as the visible body of the divine. The worship that gathered them found its home at Surakani, on the edge of the modern city, where the temple known as Ateshgar, the building that stands today raised only in the 17th and 18th centuries, encloses a courtyard around a central flame fed straight from the gas beneath. The stone is younger than many of Baku's mosques. The devotion it houses is far older. Islam did not undo what that older worship had understood, that here reverence begins with fire. Inside, under a low arch where the light falls in bars across the carpet, the rhythm of prayer keeps a time older than the building around it, and the memory it holds reaches beyond the borders of the country. The French novelist Alexandre Dumas, who toured the Caucasus in 1858, is said to have visited the fire temple and written of the pilgrims he found there, men who by his account had come the length of a continent, some reportedly from as far as India, to tend flames sacred to faiths their homelands had carried west along the trade roads. By the time of his visit, the temple was already fading, its worshippers thinning toward the last few, the devotion outliving by centuries the empires that had first spread it. What that account set down was an ending long in the making, a fire still watched by hands that had crossed deserts and mountains to reach it. Out past the temple, in the narrow stone lanes of the walled old city, the worn thresholds and shuttered windows hold a past that is underfoot rather than behind glass, and the oldest of its rhythms still turns with the season rather than the sermon. Each year in late March, as the days begin to lengthen, families mark Novruz, the spring new year kept on this land long before Islam arrived, when the year is opened not with a prayer but with a fire. In a courtyard off one of the lanes, a low bonfire is built from dried brush and lit at dusk, and the household leaps it one by one, carrying the year's troubles into the flame and out the far side. A small child edges to the rim, hesitates at the heat, and jumps a moment after the rest, and the oldest firelight the country keeps comes down to the size of one backyard and one held breath. Above the old walls, on a ridge over the bay, 3 curved towers of glass rise more than 180 meters and catch the daylight along their flanks, built in the shape of flame and named for it. After dark, their faces turn to screens and burn orange from base to tip, a slow flicker thrown across the whole city so that the newest thing on the skyline performs the oldest thing beneath the ground. It is easy to read the towers as mere spectacle, and easier still once the 4,000-year habit behind them is set aside. But the country has worshipped fire, tended it in temples, and leapt it at the turn of the year, and the glass only gives that long devotion its latest form. The calendar the fire once set still turns, and it still starts each morning at the kitchen jet under the first glass of tea. In a kitchen a few streets back from the Baku waterfront, the gas ring under the kettle is turned low and kept lit around the clock, a small blue jet lit before dawn that will still be burning when the last glass is poured after dark, because the domestic gas here rises from the same seep-rich ground that feeds the hill and reaches the household at a price low enough that no one thinks to put the flame out between meals. The first task of that flame each day is to boil water for tea, and the tea, once made, is kept going all day. It is poured from a squat pot kept hot at the back of the ring into a small pear-shaped glass called an armadou, pinched at the waist so the heat holds at the base while the rim stays cool enough to lift, and it is taken dark without milk, with a wedge of lemon or a spoon of fig or cherry preserve set alongside, and often a lump of sugar held between the teeth for the tea to pass over on its way down. Azerbaijanis are among the heaviest tea drinkers on earth, and a single household may empty a pot many times over in a day, refilling long past the point at which a visit elsewhere would be counted done. Tea marks every juncture of the day and every stage of a conversation, poured to open a discussion and poured again to close it so that the pot becomes a clock no one has to watch. When the day calls for more than tea, the same flame carries the country's central dish, plov, rice steamed grain by grain until each one stands separate, colored gold with saffron steeped in hot water and served with meat, chestnuts, dried apricots and raisins folded through, is the food of weddings, of holidays, of any table set to matter, and cooks count more than 40 regional versions of it across the country. It is built slowly over the low jet, the rice laid over a base of flatbread or thin dough that crisps against the hot metal into a crust turned out at the end like a lid, and the whole pot rests above a flame that has been running in one form or another longer than the family gathered around it. In the corner of the kitchen, a grandmother works the way her own grandmother did, wrist steady over the pot, one hand turning the ring by a quarter to hold the steam even, the other reaching without looking for the glass a granddaughter has already refilled and set at her elbow. Nothing about the scene announces itself. The flame is low, the only sounds are the kettle and the wind at the window, and the oldest continuous fire in the country is doing the smallest possible work, keeping one pot hot for one family through one ordinary afternoon. That small work carries a large rule. A guest who crosses the threshold is handed a glass within minutes, before questions and before business, and is kept at the table while the pot still holds tea. To feed a visitor from the family's own flame is the oldest courtesy the country keeps, older than the mosque, older than the derricks. For most of its people, being called a guest is the highest thing the language can offer. But within living memory, for 1 million citizens of this same country, the word would come to mean something else entirely. Not a welcome extended for an evening, but a condition endured for 30 years, guests at no one's invitation, inside a homeland that was already their own. The word is guest, and for 30 years it named a wound rather than a welcome. When the dispute over Nagorno-Karabakh, the mountainous region in the country's southwest, sharpened in the final years of the 1980s and broke into open war that ran until a ceasefire in 1994, hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis were driven out of the region and the 7 districts ringing it, and together with the refugees who fled Armenia in the same years, the total forced from their homes came to roughly 1 million. They carried what a family can carry and went to the one place with room to hold them, which was Baku. The city absorbed them the way it absorbs the wind off the Caspian, without ceremony and without pause. The displaced filled tower blocks that had never been finished, sanatoriums closed since Soviet days, school gymnasiums and railway carriages parked on unused sidings, often a whole family to a single room, and there many of them remained not for a season or a year, but for the better part of 3 decades. A country counted them among its own citizens while they lived, in every practical sense, as guests inside it. After dark, in a half-built block on the northern edge of the city, a light comes on behind bare concrete and a family gathers to tea beneath a photograph of a house in a village the youngest of them have never seen. On a nail by the door hangs the key to that house, kept through the birth of grandchildren who grew up in Baku, knowing their home only as a place spoken of in the past tense, a key that most likely opens a building that no longer stands. This is the daily shape of the loss. Not a battlefield, but a kettle kept warm, a borrowed room, and a key that turns in no lock. The Karabakh Azerbaijanis carried that grief into the ordinary rooms of the city that took them in, into the mosques where the displaced knelt among the long-settled and could not be told apart from them, into a generation that came of age able to describe a homeland it had never been allowed to walk. Then, across 44 days in the autumn of 2020 and again in the autumn of 2023, the lines on the map moved and the districts sealed for 30 years were opened. The going back has been slow, and much of what waits is cleared rubble, uncleared mines, and the lines of old streets showing faint under 30 years of grass. Still, families have begun to return, some to rebuild on the foundations their grandparents last locked, and for a few of them, the key by the door has found a wall to belong to again. What pays for that return is not memory. The new roads climbing back into the mountains, the towns rising a second time from cleared ground, are declared a national priority by the country's president, Ilham Aliyev, and funded by the one thing this coast has always surrendered more readily than any other, drawn from the same earth that burns on the hill and heats the tea and once drew the priests to their knees. 12 kilometers south of the burning hill, the same ground gives up something the priests never thought to sell. Oil lies close beneath the Absheron in quantities that once made this shore the most valuable coastline on Earth, and the fire that had been venerated for 4,000 years was, within a single century, drilled, barreled, and shipped. The pricing began early and moved fast. In 1846, on the bay at Bibi Heibat, just south of the city, workers sank what is often called the first mechanically drilled oil well in recorded history, 13 years before the Pennsylvania well, usually credited with opening the modern age of oil. Within a generation, the derrick stood so close along the shore that a whole district of Baku became known simply as Black Town for the smoke that hung over it. By 1901, by many accounts, the fields around the city were lifting close to half of all the oil produced in the world. The Nobel brothers built a company here in 1879 that grew into one of the largest oil concerns on the planet, and part of the fortune it generated passed through Alfred Nobel into the endowment that still funds the prize bearing the family name. 40 years on, in the Second World War, these same fields fueled much of the Soviet war effort and became one of the most fought-over prizes in Europe. When the shore fields began to thin, the search moved out onto the water. In 1949, 40 kilometers out in the open Caspian, engineers began building Neft-Dashlere, the oil rocks, a settlement raised on trestles and landfill above the sea with causeways, dormitories, a bakery and a tree-lined boulevard, said to be the first offshore oil city anywhere in the world. At its height, the complex carried some 300 kilometers of streets and bridges linking a spread of drilling platforms, and workers still live out there on rotation today. The industry that grew from that first well now runs through nearly everything. Oil and gas account for the great majority of what the country sells abroad, carried west since 2006 through a pipeline that runs 1,768 kilometers from Baku to the Mediterranean coast, and the bay at Bibi Heibat, where the first well was sunk, still holds working rigs more than a century and a half on. Yet out on a platform in the Caspian, past the seawall and the anchored tankers, the scale of it narrows again to a single pair of hands. A worker sets a small pear-shaped glass of tea on a steel rail beside the pump, lets it cool a moment in the wind, and drinks it there above 400 meters of water, the same fire that lights the burner under his glass now turning, far below him, into the thing the whole country lives on. After dark, the change is easiest to read. Along the shore and out across the water, gas flares stand orange on the tops of the derricks, dozens of small fires burning over the Caspian, while 20 kilometers north, the wall of flame on the hill leans in the same wind above the same ground. One fire knelt too, the other sold, both drawn from an earth that has gone on surrendering it for as long as anyone has lived here. And when the sky begins to grey again over the peninsula, the day starts where it has always started. On the hillside at the edge of the city, the wall of flame still stands after the shepherd has taken his flock home and the wind has turned cold off the Caspian, leaning in the dark exactly as it leaned before there were prophets to name it, throwing its light on bare rock and on no one. 20 kilometers south, the gas flares burn orange on the derricks over the water. In a kitchen between them, a glass of tea cools to the temperature of the room. A key hangs on a nail by a door, and a family has gone home. Fire is only the first of the things this coast gives up. And the same earth holds other lives, other cities, other countries still waiting to be walked. The ground beneath all of it keeps burning.